Hi there, fellow classic comic collectors. As always, I'm Scott Harris King, and welcome to the special 100 subscription party. Woohoo! First, just thank you so much to everyone who has chosen to subscribe to my videos. It really means a lot to me. I'm just here in my room during quarantine, going through my old comics, talking to the walls. And thanks to the magic of YouTube and you guys, the walls are actually talking back. It's a little surreal, not gonna lie, but I really like it. And I really just want to thank everyone for supporting the channel and supporting my little YouTubing effort here. And I'm having a lot of fun doing it. So, as promised, to celebrate 100 subscriptions, I'm making a video here where I'm answering 100 questions. It's the Classic Comic Collector Ask Me Anything video. Of course, I didn't actually get 100 questions, but I did get more than I was expecting, and I'm going to answer them all here. I'm going to just be reading the questions off of my computer, which you can't see, but it's right here. Right, you can see the glow off of the screen there. So I'm going to just jump right into those questions, and here we go. Okay, Dr. Dune asks, of all the romance comics you have, what is your favorite series? Not my favorite book, but my favorite series. It's a good question. Actually, the answers to these would be very similar because my favorite individual issues are also from my favorite series. That's part of why it is my favorite series. And that is DC's version of Young Love. So I want to specify it's the DC run of Young Love. Young Love originally was started by Simon and Kirby and during the Golden Age pre-code, and that ran for something like 73 issues. It ended up being taken over by another publisher, and that series had been canceled. They brought it back starting with issue 17. They replaced another title, and they published that up to issue 38, and then DC bought the rights to Young Love, and they became the third publisher of the series, and they published the series from issues 39 to 126, and that run there, the DC version of Young Love, is probably my favorite title. A couple reasons for that is that I'm a big fan of soap opera stuff. When I was a little kid, my grandmother took care of us after school because my parents were working, and she would just watch soap operas all day. And so I just have these fond memories of the soap opera style storytelling. And DC did some experiments with some soap opera style long form continuing storylines in their series. And Young Love is unique in that it's the only one of the titles that has two different soap operas. Starting with issue 39, they begin this thing. This is Mary Robin, Registered Nurse, and that runs up through issue 52 or so. But then in issue 68, they started a new one, which is The Lives and Loves of Lisa St. Clair. There's also some individual issues that I'm a big fan of. I might do some single issue spotlights in some of those stories. 104 is a personal favorite. That's a story by Robert Conagher, of all people, where a Vietnam vet with post-traumatic stress falls in love with a nun. So that's a favorite of mine. And then issue 126, which is the last mainstream romance comic that was published. It was basically the end of the romance genre. The last issue, 126, is fantastic. So a lot of favorites, favorite individual issues. 106 with the crazy women's lib story with the girl in hot pants. It's just whatever. It's just there's so many cool stories and covers and stuff. So Young Love would be my pick. So thank you, Dr. Dune, for submitting that question. Okay, next here, the Gray Man. His first question here is, how's the weather? Well, it's nighttime right now. It's clear, but dark, and it's a little bit chilly. It's been quite warm here recently, but today it cooled off a little, so I think it's probably in the 50s right now since it's almost 11 p.m. So, but it was a nice sunny day in the low 60s, and it's definitely, we seem to jump right from a very mild winter directly into summer. There's been basically no spring at all here, but that's just global warming for you. Okay. Comic Book Aesthete asks 5 different questions. I'm going to answer all 5 of them here. Question number 1. What is your favorite comic book or comic book character to collect? It's an interesting question. I'm a completist. I already have full runs of a lot of my favorite series and characters, so I don't really collect them much anymore because I've already collected them. I would probably say that Boy Comics and the character of the Crimebusters for the last 10 years, that's sort of been my focus. I just finished that run last year finally. It ran for 117 issues from 1942 to 1956. And at some point, I'm going to do one of my complete run madness videos where I show you all 117 issues. And then I've started self-publishing my own continuation of the series, picking up where that left off with issue 120. So I would say that's probably my answer. Boy Comics and Crimebuster. Again, I have a full run. I have basically every appearance of Crimebuster at this point. There's a text story and like a full page ad introducing Crimebuster in Daredevil number 9, I think. So that's a very expensive issue that I kind of want to get. And there's also a spin-off from Crimebusters season Boy Comics called Squeaks that was animal humor stories starring Crimebusters sidekick pet monkey Squeaks, and that ran 5 issues. I think I've got 2 or 3 of them, but I don't have all of them, so I've got a little bit of ways to go. So that would be my answer to that question. Question 2, what is my holy grail? Good question. I've thought about this a lot. There's a lot of tricky factors to this, but I think the final answer would be Captain America comics number 1 would be my holy grail. You get to a certain point with the price of the comics where I kind of don't want to own them because they cost so much that they're out of my league. Like, I wouldn't want to have a Captain America comics here in my house. I would feel uncomfortable with that. It's cost so much money. It would be worth more than like everything else I own combined. And on the other hand, having something like that in a lockbox in a bank somewhere seems weird, where I could just visit it once in a while. It kind of defeats the purpose of owning it. So those are some of the factors. Wonder Woman's first appearance in All-Star Comics number 8 is another close second for me. And that, 10 years ago, I wouldn't have felt too weird about having around because it was only a couple or a few $1,000s, but that's blown up. So even that might be a little too much for me to have around the house. But if I was super rich and I had a vault with a bunch of burly security guards in first-themed costumes to protect my comics, like the Royal Flush Gang or something, Captain America comics number 1, that would be my grail. Question 3, which of my comics are my most prized gems? I've done a couple videos with my top 50s. And so my basic answer, you can see me go in more detail in those videos. In video number 1, I talk about my Avengers number 1 and my Avengers number 4. They both have a lot of personal meaning to me. Also, my Boy Comics number 3 is first issue of the series, first appearance of Crimebuster, and was also a gift from my wife. And then in the other video, Gru number 1, which, I used to read Gru with my dad, and I've had that autographed by Sergio Aragonés and Stan Sakai. So those would be my 4 top books. Those would be the last 4 books I would ever get rid of. Avengers 1, Avengers 4, Boy Comics 3, Gru number 1. And I'll have some links up here if you haven't seen those so you can watch them. Who are the best comic book creators, writers, artists? Well, best is an interesting word. It's a little bit different from favorite. People that jump to mind that I think are just masters. Jack Kirby, I think, has to be top 5 of all time. I've never really gotten into Will Eisner stuff, but I understand how influential he is. Joe Kubert is someone that I think is an all-time great. Writers are a little bit hard. I'm actually a defender of Stan Lee, so I would put Stan Lee up there. There's some people that worked for Archie that I'm a really big fan of. Harry Lucy is one of my personal Mount Rushmore of artists. Darwin Cook, I think, is just about the perfect artist. Frank Doyle is a guy that most people never heard of, but he wrote a lot of the best Archie stories. He wrote like something like over 10,000 Archie stories. So I mean, Frank Doyle deserves a lot of love. It's a little bit harder with writers. I think Charles Biro, who created Crimebuster and wrote Boy Comics, he's better known for Daredevil, Crime Does Not Pay. He would be right up there for me, again, sort of overlooked. But I guess like my personal Mount Rushmore of personal favorites, my three artists are Harry Lucy, Alex Toth, and Darwin Cook, who I think is the perfect mix of both of their styles. And again, I just Kirby and Kubert are right up there. So I guess I hope that answered it. And number 5, which comic book cover is my number 1 of all time? I sort of answered this, I think, with my Grail question, because I did a lot of thinking about this. There's so many great covers. I've showed some of my videos of the ones that I have. WoW Comics 38, Young Romance 150. Those are things that immediately come to mind. And then, of course, a lot of great superhero covers. I don't like covers that are really busy. I like generally covers that have like big into the design elements. So these are factors for me, but I think Captain America Comics number 1 is probably my number 1 cover. I love the design. I love the way the cover looks. For me, when I'm looking at covers, I'm not just looking at the image. I'm looking at the whole cover. So it's graphic design, it's the logo, it's all the different design elements. I think I've mentioned before, like DC's Big 52, those 25-cent giants from around 1971. That's probably my favorite design era, because a lot of those also had really cool logos. One of the reasons I love Joe Kubert is he did a thing where he would hand draw different logos on his covers depending on what the artwork was like. So but Captain America Comics number 1 is probably my all-time favorite. I love everything about it, what it symbolizes, literally and figuratively. Just the artwork is just great. It's probably my top cover. So thanks, Comic Book Aesthete. I really appreciate the questions and the support. Silver Hair Bronze Age Babe Comics asks my 3 desert island books. Now, I've been thinking about this. I almost asked for clarification when he said books, whether you mean like individual comic books or mean books. I thought it'd be more fun if I didn't clarify them, so I can try and answer it both ways, although I haven't entirely figured out the comic book part of this. Okay, I've done some thinking on it. I actually have the answers for my books. The comic books are actually more difficult, but my 3 Desert Island books that I would bring. The first is actually a comic. It's a comic collection. It's the complete 1-volume Bone by Jeff Smith. I think it's an absolute classic in terms of comics. Just flat out, period. One of the all-time greatest comics. Greatest American comics for sure. If anyone hasn't read it, it's basically got everything. It's got some great cartooning and great humor. It's got romance and drama and action and high fantasy. It starts off sort of like a Disney-esque sort of Huey, Dewey, and Louie sort of thing. But as it progresses, it turns into Lord of the Rings. So if you can imagine Lord of the Rings starring Huey, Dewey, and Louie, that's Bone. The other great thing about the Bone complete 1-volume edition is it's like 1,300 pages. So there's plenty to read there. The second book on my list would be the 1-volume biography of Winston Churchill. It's just called Churchill. That's something that I read every couple of years. Churchill, to me, is one of the great figures of history, and obviously he is a controversial figure. There's certain, areas where I think his decisions and policies are debatable. For the most part, he's just, I think, one of the great figures. I love just reading about his story, particularly the World War II section, the stuff leading up to World War II. So I read that every couple of years. I reread it again. It's like 1,000 pages, but it's engrossing. It's really great. And the third book for me would be The Little Prince. It's a book that has a lot of personal meaning for my wife and I. So those would be my three books. Now, comics are a little bit tricky. There's a lot of things that go into trying to bring a single issue of a comic. That's what's really tricky. But easy pick for me is Astro City number 1/2. Even though it's only 16 pages, it's just about the perfect single issue comic story. It's absolutely great. Another pick for me would be Our Fighting Forces 152, which is Jack Kirby written and drawn. And for me, I think it's maybe Kirby's best work. It's just absolutely amazing especially in terms of his war books. It's just so visceral. It's just fantastic. I should do a whole video just on Our Fighting Forces 152 because I love to talk about it and just to show it. It's so great. And then my third one, it's a little bit more up in the air. There's a lot of choices. I really loved the New Mutants special edition number 1. I think it was from '86. That's a story that I literally read the cover off when I was a kid. The only issue with that is the story's continued in X-Men Annual number 9. It's not really finished there. I have that problem with a lot of the stories that I would like to bring. But if you had to press me on it right now, I might pick that or Young Love 126, which I already mentioned, because that has a bunch of great stuff. So thanks very much for the question. I really appreciate it. Silverhead Bronze Age Babe Comics. If you haven't visited her channel, give it a shot. Same for the Gray Man. For all of these people, if you haven't visited the channels, check them out. They're really cool. So, next question is from my friend Jason Studley, and he asked me 2 questions. What's my favorite Avengers storyline and my favorite Avengers cover? Now, Avengers, I think, is the best superhero series of all time. I think it's 25 years of incredibly high level writing and art. The most consistently great mainstream superhero series, in my opinion. Yes, I think it's better than X-Men or Teen Titans or whatever you're about to say. I think Avengers is better than that, so let's just not even argue about it. Having said that, I can tell you my number 1, but I'm just gonna tell you my top 5. My top 5 storylines from Avengers. Number 5 is the Fall of Yellow Jacket from Avengers 211 to 230. I started reading right after that, so I know a lot of old-time fans were really upset when that happened, but for me, that was just part of the character's history, so I didn't experience that. I totally get it, though. Number 4, I have the Bride of Ultron story in Avengers 161 and 162 with George Perez, written by Jim Shooter. It's just fantastic. Just an all-time great. Number 3, it's a slightly more recent storyline that a lot of people probably haven't read. It's the Kang Dynasty storyline by Kurt Busiek from Avengers Volume 3. It ran for a long time. It was like number 41 through 54, 56 maybe even. I think it was 54. So it was over a year, and it's just this amazing story that seems like it's a what if, but it's not, where Kang actually conquers all of Earth, and all of the superheroes are rounded up and put in like concentration camps, and there's a group of Avengers that are shanghaied in space, and they come back. And anyway, it's really great. And so number 2, I have the Korvac saga from Avengers 167 to 177. Again, a lot of great art by George Perez, Jim Shooter writing. Towards the end, both of them were replaced by other artists, but that's one and I always think of Jason when I think of that, because we were both missing the last issue of that storyline. And I remember driving around looking for it to all these comic shops together, just trying to find this 177 so we could finally find out what the hell happens at the end of the story. Because back then, if you didn't have the issue, you just didn't know what happened. So, yeah, I love that one. But my number 1 is The Mansion Siege. Roger Stern, John Buscema, Avengers 271, 273 through 277, where the Masters of Evil take over Avengers Mansion. Read that one when I was a kid. Again, I remember um, every time a new issue would come out, I would call Jason. We'd call each other after we'd get the new comics, which back then was on Friday. And I just remember, like, when I read issue 274 at the end of the issue, um, Hercules had been like almost beaten to death, and it looked like he was dead. And the next issue was called "Even a God Can Die," and I was like, "Oh my God, they killed Hercules! I can't believe it!" And I had to wait a whole month to find out what happened. Anyway, so that's not only a great story that I think very much holds up now. Rereading it several times as I have as an adult, it completely holds up. But also, I have all these great sort of classic childhood memories, that came out when I was 13 or 14. So it is right in the perfect time to get that. So that would be my number one, The Mansion Siege. Now, in terms of Avengers covers, I'm going to throw out a bit of a left field pick, a little bit, and say that my favorite Avengers cover is actually Avengers number 96. It's a Neil Adams cover. It's got a white frame cover because it was during the 25-cent frame issues, and it's the Vision is beating the Skrull guy to death while the Avengers are running at him in the background. I just always love that cover. It's also the first issue that features the classic Avengers logo that we all know and love today, the one that's been used ever since and for the movies and all this stuff. 96 is the first appearance of that logo. If you look at Avengers, the absolute seismic change in the style of the book from issue 91 with the old logo and like the Sal Buscema art to 96 with the new logo and the Neil Adams art, it feels like the book jumped forward like 50 years. It goes from feeling like an old-fashioned title or looking like an old-fashioned title to looking like a futuristic title. So 96 to me, great cover. It's my personal favorite. My copy I have signed by Neil Adams, and yeah. So thanks for watching the videos and asking the questions, Jason. And I have a lot of great memories about talking about Avengers with you. So yeah, it's great. Thanks. Okay, the next batch of questions comes from MRP. And how and when did you first discover or get into comics? So I'm gonna do a longer video sort of about my journey, and I've got an announcement coming up in a little while where I'll explain. I've got a series of interviews I'm going to be doing, and we're going to be talking about this in depth with some different people. But the short version is that I was aware of comics. I had read comic collections of comic strips and stuff like that. Stuff like Garfield. I had gotten some like the mini Atari Force comics with Atari cartridges, so I was aware of comics. But the first time I ever read an actual comic book, my parents had joined a bowling league, and while they were bowling, there needed to be something to occupy my time since I was a kid, just sitting around a bowling alley. So they gave me a couple dollars to go to the convenience store and buy something to entertain myself with, and they had a spinner rack, and I bought a couple issues of Blackhawk 269 and 270, and just immediately, as soon as I read them, that was it. Comic fan for life. So I'll go into a little more detail when I do the full video on that, but that's the short answer. So it was right at the beginning in 1984. It was probably like January, February 84, I think. So I was 10 at the time, and I just immediately knew this was it. What has been your best experience when meeting a comic creator? Good question. I mean, most of the comic creators that I've met, the experiences have been fine. Some have been, just so-so. I haven't had any really bad experiences. Um, I am a friend of Bob Almond, who is a huge Avengers fan, a big comic fan. He's also an inker. Who has been inking for Marvel in particular for decades at this point, and he runs a an organization called the Inkwell Awards that's just about recognizing inkers because they're so under-recognized. So he's local, and so I see him a lot of shows, and it's always nice to see Bob. He lets me sometimes leave my piles of comics that I've purchased behind his table. He likes to sniff the comics. Um, so I try and find some really good smelling back issues so we can really get that newsprint wafting up. So it's always nice to see Bob. Um, when I met Kurt Busiek, that was a really nice experience. Mark Wade is really nice to talk to. George Perez is great. The only problem with George is that he is so nice and he's so in demand that it's actually very hard to see him anymore. Because I'm not even sure if he's still doing conventions now that he's retired. But when he was, they basically would give out tickets because he would actually do free convention sketches. Those sketches that other people are charging, $40, $60 for. He'd do them free, but he could only do a certain amount. So they'd give you tickets. And so you'd have to get to his table first thing. As soon as you enter the door, or as soon as the door's open, you go right to George Perez's table, get a ticket, so that you'll have a chance to be one of the limited people that could actually see him. I had the chance to meet him in the late 90s at a show, and he was just great. But he's so generous with his time that it actually makes it hard for him to have nearly enough time to interact with all the people that want to see him. So, yeah, there's a lot of, doing conventions can be a grind. So I have sympathy for the creators who get a little bit ornery, particularly when you're like sitting, it's always sad to see these great creators. These are sort of legendary creators who are just sitting there with nobody visiting their booth, because a lot of the current wave of people coming to shows that have been brought in by the movies and stuff, they don't know the old creators, and that's heartbreaking for me personally. So I feel a lot of sympathy. I can understand why some of them would be a little testy in certain situations. For the most part, my interactions have been fine, though. But yeah, those are some of the creators that I had really nice interactions with. Let's see. And last question here from MRP. What's your process for creating Crimebusters? Do you plot first, do full script, plot as you lay out pages, or have a written script plot to work from, thumbnails, then layouts, then full pencils? So, good question. My process has actually been different. I'm working issue 3 right now, and my process has been different for each issue. I've been trying different things. It's just as I work through it, different things make sense. With issue 1, I did... I wrote out an outline, then I did thumbnails on paper for the entire story. The first issue of the story is 30 pages for the main story. There's a 4-page backup, so I did thumbnails for the whole thing. Then when I went on to my computer program, Clip Studio Paint, aka Manga Studio 5, I did layouts, full layouts for the whole book. And then I went through and I did the line work, and then I went through and I did all the inking and shading, and then I went through and added all the dialogue. With the second issue, I did it differently. The thumbnail / layouts, I did it at the same time. So I would just, as I was figuring out the pages in Clip Studio Paint, I didn't draw anything out by hand. I basically skipped the thumbnail process and did that as the layouts, because I don't really do detailed layouts. I basically do stick figures. I'm just working out the camera angles and stuff like that. And with this issue 2, after I did the line work, I then did all the dialoguing before I did the inking. I liked that better. With issue 3, having some different challenges. I've been having some health issues. It's making it difficult for me to actually do the drawing, so I'm trying to figure out ways to continue working on the comic without being able to actually draw it. At this point, I've got the whole thing all laid out, so I've got all the pages with all of the layouts and thumbnails done for the whole book. It's a 30-page main story and a 6-page backup, so it's 36 pages. The next part of the process, because I'm having a little bit of trouble again with some health stuff that's making it difficult for me to draw for long periods of time, I might actually dialogue the whole thing next. That's a little bit trickier in some ways, because It's when I have the artwork worked out, I can sort of tailor the dialogue to how I've drawn the faces and stuff like that. This is basically will just be the reverse. So if I dialogue it out first, then I can draw to the dialogue. Um, and I think for this issue, it might make sense to do it that way, because there's some things that I need to work out in terms of the character stuff and the humor, which in issue 2 there are some physical humor gags, so drawing that out work better. In this case, the humor and the some of the character bits are really going to be dialogue driven. So doing that first will then inform how I end up drawing the panels. So that's what I'm looking at right now: full layouts and then dialoguing it, which will be interesting because basically I'm going to have the whole comic done and readable, except for all the art will just be stick figures. um, Comics. So yeah, that's basically every issue. I'm learning more about the process. It's going a little bit faster, but it's also I'm just trying a different process for me. I never do a full script. I don't think that's really necessary for me personally, since I'm drawing it myself. I think it would be a lot of wasted effort. I do have a comic that I'm working on with an artist where I'm just writing it, and we actually didn't do full script for that either. We did a Marvel style. So I wrote out like a detailed outline, broken down sort of by 2-page spreads. And we had like a conference call that we did for like an hour where we went through the whole thing and I gave notes. And he's off drawing it. So that will be interesting. I've seen some of the pages, and the pages I've seen look great, but you know, you never know. It's a 32-page story, so I'm curious to see. And then I'll have to put on my Stan Lee hat and try and get the dialogue right to match the art that's been done. So that's interesting. So thanks for the questions, MRP. I appreciate it. And let's see. So the next question is from Emmanuel Saman. Hi, Emmanuel. And his question is, are there creators you had planned to meet but could not due to unforeseen circumstances? So yes, I have 2 stories for this. One is just annoying, and the other one is really frustrating and sad for me. The annoying one is that there's a convention right by my house. There's a convention that happens once in a while that's like 10 minutes drive from my house, and it's a smaller convention. I don't actually like it that much. But right after we moved here, they had the first one at that location, and Jim Shooter was going to be there as the guest of honor. And Jim Shooter for me is like a major figure. He's very controversial, I know, but I really like a lot of his writing. And as a kid growing up during the Shooter era at Marvel, he was just like a major figure for me. I think he is probably, if not the best Avengers writer of all time, is definitely, top 3 for sure. And I personally would probably have him at number 1. I've had a chance to meet all of the other major Avengers writers and get their signatures. Avengers is a book that had a lot of continuity, so for the first like 25 years, they basically only had like 6 regular writers. I've gotten to meet everyone but Jim Shooter. So I've got Stan Lee's autograph, I've got Roy Thomas's autograph, Steve Englehart, I've met David Michelinie, Roger Stern, Kurt Busiek, Walt Simonson. The one that I haven't met is Jim Shooter, and he was supposed to be at the show, and it didn't show up. I think there was a weather issue or something, but it was the sort of thing where like I already had bought my ticket in advance, and then you show up at the convention and Jim Shooter's just not there, the whole reason to go. So that was a major disappointment for me. A bigger disappointment was Joe Kubert. I was gonna go to a show where Joe Kubert was coming to Boston. This was several years ago, and I don't remember the circumstances, but the day of the show, I think I was sick or something. I just couldn't do it. I might have had to work or something. The details escape me, but I was like reluctantly decided, I just can't go, and I'll catch him next time. And then he passed away later that year, very unexpectedly, because he had been in really good health, and then he got sick and just passed away. Just happened very suddenly, and that was a huge disappointment to me. He's, to me, one of the Mount Rushmore all-time great comic creators. specifically wanted to talk to him because he's also was one of the only artists left who worked on the original Crimebusters series in Boy Comics. He drew some of the final issues. There is one other creator who is still alive who worked on that series. I haven't talked to him. He doesn't do shows. I'm not going to mention who he is, but I do have his phone number. But I'm just too shy to call him. It's too big for me. I do get shy sometimes when I'm meeting these sort of comic book heroes of mine. And but anyway, Joe Kubert, a huge disappointment. I had books picked out for him to sign, and I had a bunch of questions about working with Norman Maurer, who is a very, very close friend of his, who's like the major Crimebuster artist on Boy Comics. And I just really wanted to pick his brain about what it was like working there, working with Norman Maurer, what stories they had about Lev Gleason and Charles Bureau and the Crimebuster strip. And unfortunately, that's all been lost. I'd never had the chance, so that was a big disappointment. So thanks for the question, Emmanuel, and let's see what questions we have next. And finally, we got our last question. This comes from an anonymous questioner who also happens to know my wardrobe, so we'll just leave that as an open guess there. But so our mystery questioner asked the question, since I have a huge array of different comic book themed t-shirts, this is actually not comic book themed, it's Full Metal Alchemist, but I have dozens of different comic book t-shirts. So her question was, what t-shirt, comic book character would I want to get on a shirt that I don't already have? Now, it's a good question. There's so many things available now that just a few years ago wouldn't have been available. I remember getting an Iron Fist shirt like 6 years ago, well before the TV series, and I was really excited because it was just it looked really cool, and it gave me some cool cred with the people. And then the TV show came out, and it was like a steaming pile, and then I didn't want to wear that shirt anymore. It's just been interesting, back in the day you couldn't get anything, and then it was just sort of the main characters. I've always had a thing for sort of the slightly offbeat. I remember getting a Reverse Flash shirt back in the 90s, and then that was pretty niche, but it was one of my favorite t-shirts I've ever had, was that Reverse Flash shirt. But nowadays you can get just about anything. My taste in comics tends to run a little outside of the mainstream. I have all the mainstream shirts I want. I've got a couple different Captain America shirts, a couple Wonder Woman shirts. I've even got a couple Batman shirts. I don't even really care for Batman that much. I've got Superman, Avengers, lots and lots of different shirts. I have probably my favorite shirt is the one I wear to conventions whenever I go to a convention. It's a Count Dante shirt. I couldn't find it for the video. I'm not sure it's in the wash or something. But that ad from the 70s that appeared in all the comics, Count Dante, the world's most dangerous man. I've got a shirt with that ad on it. I wear that whenever I go to conventions. So to answer the question, to beat around the bush, now let's get to the question. This video is already 16 years long. There's a few characters. Warlord, I think, is probably the one that immediately jumps to mind. Warlord is one of my favorite characters. And I don't have a Warlord shirt. There's a number of series from the 70s sort of DC genre books that I'm a big fan of. So Unknown Soldier is a character that I think it would be cool to have a shirt for. Doctor Strange, I've seen a couple shirts. It's easy to get them now. I just haven't seen one that I like. Mademoiselle Marie is a character that's extremely niche, but I'm a big fan of, and it would be cool to have a shirt for her. Or Black Canary is more mainstream, but it would have to be something from the comics, not the TV show, because please. I'm just glancing around and missing anything coming to mind. I don't have any Archie shirts. I would like to get a cool Jughead shirt at some point. But I think, Warlord, Unknown Soldier, Mademoiselle Marie, those are probably the ones that immediately come to mind as the ones that I would like, that I don't currently have. So that's it. 100 subscribers. Again, thank you all so much for subscribing. Thank you for submitting the questions. And I hope there was something interesting somewhere in this mess that where I tend to ramble a little bit, but hopefully you enjoyed it. If you haven't subscribed already, please feel free to do so. I've got a dongle here where you can subscribe. I've got some other videos to watch, and I've got a bunch of stuff planned, so I've got a bunch more videos coming out soon. So thanks again, and now I've got to start brainstorming what to do for 200 subscribers. 200 questions? I don't know, it seems like a lot, but thanks again, and we'll see you next time.